Dopamine swipe, dopamine swipe. Followers, likes, double tap. Now they control your life.
What is going on, beautiful people? Welcome back to the 817 podcast, where we talk about the lovely city of Fort Worth, Texas. We get into it all, from news, business, culture. We make it happen. Happy July 4th weekend, and I'm with my co-host, Ann Zeta. Have you already started celebrating freedom in the United States?
I forgot to put up my flag banner on the front of my house. I guess I need to get that out there.
Yeah, so we got time. A Tuesday is weird. Like my wife works for a city-ish organization, JPS, and so it's like she doesn't have off Monday, but then she has off Tuesday.
Yeah, my husband gave his employees off Monday, so they have like a 4-day weekend, so they're pretty happy, I think.
Yeah, look at that. That's perfect.
But I'm making people work on Monday because we have an executive committee meeting on
Monday.
Monday.
Yeah, and we're working on Sunday, so look at us making it happen,
go.
Making sure that the 817 community gets its goodies, even when it feels like everyone else is taking a break, because it's July, so that means City Council gets to chill. It feels like, I was hanging out with Harrison from Star Telegram this weekend. Feels like they get to chill. So
everything slows down in July because it's so hot.
Yeah.
Maybe that's why.
Yeah. Also, for this episode, make sure you get your laptop, your iPad, because this is going to be a long episode because we dive into the data. These are for the super listeners of the 817 podcast who likes the numbers, to like to get their hands dirty. You're going to be able to do that with me and Ann as we're going to go through each district's demographic data, and we're going to on spot identify trends, concerns that we might see in this data. So this is a special pod, and I know some of you will enjoy it. For all of you who will be driving or trying to do this while multitasking, hopefully you still get something out of it. But this is a full episode. But before we do that, let's dive into the 3 short stories. And what do we have for the first one?
So our first short story is a Fort Worth Star Telegram article by Abby Church that was published updated on June 30th. No qualified applicants for Tarrant County election chief, ? Applications say otherwise. So I guess earlier this week, our county judge mentioned that one thing he wanted to make clear to the public was that none of the applicants for the job were qualified, which is a little alarming. In terms of a truly qualified candidate, that's debatable, O'Hare said. And he said that the 3 finalists, including an election integrity activist who sued the former elections chief, were the ones who could do the job, but none of them had election office experience, though one was an election judge.
Yeah, they say at least 7 people with current past salary jobs at election offices applied, and at least one of those candidates withdrew his application after setting up an interview. Another was never contacted for the job by the Election Commission, the 5-person body in charge of hiring the new administrator. There is also a lot of good data around the Star Telegram. Kudos to you guys reviewing all 52 applicants for election chief, including online applicant forms, cover letters, resumes, recommendation letters. So we can get into kind of the people that they kind of suggested or what they learned in that process, or we can kind of also talk about why there are some people who have qualifications, but then Tim O'Hare says there's no one qualified.
Yeah, I think they list off the people that they felt rose to the top that were qualified, none of whom were in the final 3. The commission instead went with Clint Ledwig, the county chief deputy clerk, who didn't have any election experience. But I think several people have chimed in to say that they believe he can do the job. But the biggest factor in terms of being able to be an administrator for elections is having some election experience. And one of our local political science professors at TCU agreed with that comment and said that, I'm not sure what criteria the county judge and others involved in the hiring used for selecting someone for this position, but one would reasonably think that prior election administration would be a useful trait for someone taking on the task to run elections here in Tarrant County.
Yeah. No, and some of the people looking at the people who applied, there was a Brian Hill, an election director in Fayette County, Georgia, who worked various election roles and at one point oversaw election database for the state's 159 counties. I mean, that seems pretty legitimate. I mean, also, a purple state, so like Tarrant County, a purple space, so like navigating that seems pretty legitimate. There was Karen Lawrence, a former assistant election administrator in Tarrant County who held 13 years of experience working as a director of elections in counties across North Carolina. That seems like another way better than someone who, try to sue our election administrator for fake votes and Stop 6. I mean, those two seem pretty solid.
Thankfully, that person was not hired.
Yeah. Honestly, basically for me on this short story, again, I can't, I feel like we always lead with it because to me, it's just the biggest priority, I guess, from like how do we keep election integrity, especially as Tarrant County's big federal, big as a state and locally. So we'll continue to watch it. If I was Tim O'Hara, I'll be, like Disney, trying to get Bob Iger back and say hi to Garcia. I'm sorry. I'll be nicer. I'll be more. I'll be less all over the place.
Well, I know they also mentioned that Elisa Simmons, who's one of our county commissioners, indicated that she's committed to ensuring that the person that was chosen receives the necessary education, training, and resources to adapt to his new role, and hope that their unrelated work experience will adequately prepare them to oversee the elections.
I think we kind of said everything we really need to say in this story. We'll continue to keep you guys updated. We usually lead and talk about this in the short story section because this is going to be ongoing and something that's very important. And I know a lot of you are concerned about because this is an important part as Tarrant County is a purple county and dealing with a red state, but then also the responsibilities of our county as a federal level when we do federal elections. So all of this is super important and we'll continue to keep a microscope on it.
Yeah, I think that's why it made our short story because it continues to be a story and we want to keep people apprised of what's going on.
Awesome. Well, let's move to something that was an ongoing story for a while, but it seems to be out of the news for a little bit. But I'm glad to see it back. This is a Fort Worth Report article by Rachel Barrett. Fort Worth to delay requirements for Evans and Rosedale project. Official says it won't affect construction start times.
So yes, this is the company charged with developing Fort Worth's historic South Side. It needs a little more time to secure permits and include minority contractors. They had a public meeting recently where any minority contractors that were interested in participating in the project could come and learn more about that. I didn't attend that meeting, so I'm not sure what the turnout was, but the city has been working to redevelop Evans and Rosedale Urban Village since 2000. So where are we? 23 years. And the project fell by the wayside following the recession in 2008, which I would say is something that happened with a lot of the urban villages in the city of Fort Worth. There's 13, I think, urban villages in Fort Worth, and many of them were done kind of in the early 2000s. And so all those plans have been on the books for all these many, many years. And the recession kind of stymied the actual implementation of those urban village plans.
Makes sense.
But having those in place, I think, has provided a foundation that when the economy did start to turn around and redevelopment interest started to resume, those plans being in place were really important. Because if you go back and look at those plans, which are all available on the city's website, you can see lists of community members and stakeholders who put input and thoughts into what they wanted to see happen in those areas. And so revisiting and refreshing and getting folks that maybe weren't around 23 years ago to have some say is important, but it's good that those plans existed, even if they didn't kind of come to fruition back then. They are starting to now.
The part that's sounding to me is the Hope Global has until September 1 to secure financing and purchase all the properties necessary for phase 1 of the development. So like September 1 is right around the corner, and financing is like one big stage but then like purchasing properties is also another big phase of time. So that just seems right around the corner to have not at least got the financing down so then you can focus on purchasing.
Yeah, I think some of that property is owned by the city, so I'm not sure how complicated that acquisition is going to be. And I think Hope Global is a
Dallas-based
company that has been successful with some reinvestments in other parts of the Metroplex. So hopefully that's not stymieing the progress that will be made. They did interview Johnny Lewis, who's a longtime resident, who said he's used to the delays. So I think that's something that is concerning and important to bring about or to discuss the fact that when a community has so long been marginalized and not had the things delivered that were promised, it can be really frustrating. And folks like Mr. Lewis have been involved for a long time and continue to be involved. And I appreciated his positive outlook, even in the face of another such delay that could be concerning.
Now, when Jared Howard at the National Juneteenth Museum talks about being more than a museum and having partners, is this the project that he also is leveraging in discussion? Is it seem?
I mean,
like,
it's all like right there in that same area. So yeah, I think that there definitely would be collaboration and working together on that, because basically the Juneteenth Museum is in the Evans Rosedale Urban Village, so it will be a major contributing entity there. Yeah,
and I guess like it seems like everyone's okay with this taking longer time to get more Black, brown women-led businesses to be a part of the process.
Yeah.
But to me, the underlying financing part is just obviously then there's consequences if this does not get handled correctly to the storytelling of the National Juneteenth Museum, as they're also on their campaign, because like this campaign, which is a total of $70 million, that is equivalent to what the National Juneteenth Museum is also trying to raise for themselves
in that area.
So it just seems like both Hope Global and the National Juneteenth Museum are on securing finance for this to work out together.
Right. And I think, as Robert Stearns pointed out, it's a labor of love in the historic Southside community, and there's deeply passionate people in the area with history and vision for this project, and that they need to make sure they get it right because they want to bring to reality the vision that the folks in that community have for their own community. Yeah,
I love it. Well, let's go ahead and dive into the third short story. So the third story here is that there will be a $20,000 increase in the homestead exemption in Fort Worth, allowing greater property tax relief to those above 65 and those with disabilities. The Fort Worth City Council voted unanimously to approve the increase to exemption on Tuesday. Mayor Maddie Parker in a tweet said, "Today we're proud to vote unanimously to approve a $20K increase in the over 65 disability resident homestead exemption. Property tax relief is an issue that is top of mind in every household in our city."
And the last time this exemption was raised was in 1984. So that's a long time ago. They raised it to $40,000 for people with disabilities in 1991. And they had with the new increase, it's now raised to $60,000 for both groups. So disabled and elderly property tax relief, like you said, is important. And I think there was some comment I think the mayor made in her statements when they voted on this was that they were waiting for the House and the Senate to come forward with what they were going to offer up for tax relief. But the city has some deadlines and timelines that they have to stick to. And so since the House and the Senate are still mulling this over and trying to sort it out, the city went ahead with what they can do here locally and didn't just wait on them to come up with their ideas. But hopefully there'll be some more tax relief at the state level.
The House is pushing a plan that uses compression, while the Senate wants to use compression paired with a $100,000 homestead exemption to further reduce the burden or resident property owners. So that seems like where the state play will be. Our big story is going to be the demographic data of the districts. What we'll see in that data, there's clear places where the younger ages is 5-year difference than the older districts. And so it also, to me, this is a tough one because we know these property taxes pays for the budgets so that we as a growing city can afford all the things that we say we want.
Yeah.
Yet we also don't want to displace people from their homes. And I often feel like the toughest things in society that we actually get upset about is what's the best interest for me and what's the best interest for us.
Yeah.
And those yin and yangs playing a part.
The community as a whole and individuals and the fact that your home is probably one of your major assets. And so people want their assets to be valuable and to grow in value. Yeah. But then if your taxes are based on that increase in value, then that's something that has to be planned for and can lead to people not being able to stay if they haven't worked into their budgets the ability to do that. I shared with you before we started recording that I always told my husband, you can't protest our taxes because that's the budget that the city has that I'm supposed to be delivering all the things that folks are asking of the city to deliver. So it's definitely a balance.
Yeah. And that just to me is overall just thinking about this story and what it can mean from the back end, but we'll see. A good win for people who are looking to have property taxes one of your top priorities for why you voted or what's most important to you.
And hopefully just making people aware of these exemptions, because there might be people out there who haven't even taken advantage of their homestead exemptions. And so they definitely need to be aware that those are there so that they get every benefit that they can.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's go ahead and dive into the big story. I'm really excited for this big story as new data came out about the new districts, demographic data. We're talking ethnicity. We're talking house sizes. We're talking even mobility and what it takes to get to work. And so in the description, we have each district listed out. So you could even click on it and see your district and learn more about how your district has changed. And we're just going to dive through 2 through 11. We're going to kind of read some of the data that we think is interesting. But I think what's cool, we're also going to discuss like the history of these districts and like the brand of these districts and how those brands could possibly be changing. And I know me and Ann are very nerds about this stuff and we love talking about this kind of stuff. But to me, more of us who are listening to the podcast, I think why this is important is because your local vote matters. And if you don't know the population of your neighbors or the priorities or the wealth disparities or the incomes, you it goes back to what we were just talking about as like the we instead of me kind of things that we all have to deal with. And to me, this allows me to have a better understanding as a District 11 resident, what the rest of the District 11 looks like and how I can align my voting to the things that my community actually needs, even if I'm not aware these things that are going on, I'm not aware of in my own little household.
Right. I think it is important to look at it. We started talking about how the brand of the districts prior to redistricting. And, I shared that I think there are some people who know what district they live in and have very strong feelings about their districts. And then I think the majority, unfortunately, sometimes maybe have no idea who their council member is or what district they live in.
Yeah.
And every 10 years, after the census, the lines can adjust. Even before this major change of adding 2 new districts, those lines adjusted a little bit. There was a time when we've lived in our house since 1993. And when we first bought our house, we were in District 3. And then the line moved in 2010, I believe, and put us into District 9. And we've been in District 9 ever since. And I know that there are people who really identify with District 9 and, when changes happened, fought to stay in District 9. But I think that those are not the majority of the city of Fort Worth. So we can talk about the branding of or the kind of the personality of each district. But as we've added 2 districts and 2 of them are brand new and some lines have changed, I'm not sure that all of that applies anymore. And I don't know if it's based on anecdotal experiences of individuals or the actual data of those districts, which is why I think it's so cool that the city has these demographic reports on the city's website under this thing called My Sidewalk, I guess is where they generated this information from, so that you can understand the people, the housing, and the jobs all within your community.
How did you, and I know you talked about this data being used for projects that the city has on where to provide additional support and funding.
So about 8 years ago now, or maybe even 9, the city started something called the Neighborhood Improvement Program, which is another tab on the city's website that folks can pull up, and we'll share that in the show notes as well. But back in 2017, the city started this Neighborhood Improvement Program, and they identified a neighborhood based on data. And that data came from kind of the stuff that we're sharing here today, but they focused mainly on educational attainment, poverty, income levels, and determined neighborhoods that had been kind of underserved, and those levels were low. So low educational attainment, high poverty levels, low income levels. And so as council members, you would want to have funding come to your district, but basing this on this data, it's not up to the individual council members to advocate for the money to come to their district. You look at the data and determine where these statistics are existing, and then bring those funding levels to those neighborhoods. So the first one was the Stop 6 neighborhood. The second one was Ash Crescent. The third was Northside. The fourth was Rosemont. The fifth was Como, and then sixth, Las Vegas Trail. And then the one that most recently in 2023 was the historic Marine neighborhood. And so in those programs, the city has funds available for a variety of things. Lighting, infrastructure, roads, all those sidewalks, all these amenities that some neighborhoods have and some neighborhoods lack. And they go to those communities and discuss, what do you struggle with in your community, and which of these things that the city can fund would you like to see improved, fixed, or brought if they don't exist at all. And so all of those things happened in those various neighborhoods, and it's a percentage of the budget each year, and so that number has gone up each year. And I think it has been a pretty overwhelming success. It's kind of, you'll notice that all these neighborhoods are kind of in the urban core of the city, so they're probably older neighborhoods that have been around for longer. And as we've focused more on, shiny new things instead of maintaining the infrastructure in these older neighborhoods, I think that that's something that is a good way to decide.
Looking at it. So Stop 6, and I'm playing guess, just looking at the map. I don't have the Stop 6 would be like District 5, District 8, kind of. Like, I'm trying to think who is missing from the funding. Like Como is 6, Las Vegas Trail's 3, Rosemont is now 11, so 9.
It was 9.
Yeah, but now 9 will not be getting that additional funding.
But it's just a one-time each year.
I see.
So it's not a continued funding thing. It's one time each year. Each neighborhood area is chosen, and then they get that funding for that year. Understand.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and dive into, you're right. I think a lot of people don't have a lot of identity to their districts. To me, if there was one, maybe 9 is the only one, because of like it being, I feel like if you're in Texas, you're proud of your district if you live in the progressive district that might have the progressive candidate on city council. So if you were, I see District 9 people, like the story you shared, I could totally see the fans and people being proud of District 9 because of that.
I'm in District 9 and have been for quite a long time, so I feel like I'm surrounded by people who feel strongly about that. But I think there is probably a significant number of people that live in District 9 that don't know that they're, I think the bigger story is probably that the majority, if you look at our voting turnout, the majority of people don't even bother to vote. So they probably have no idea what district they live in. So I think that's why it's important for this to be our big story, is that we're really trying to encourage civic engagement.
And for us, and for us, like, to me, it's like the people who do know are the people who listen to this pod. So like, it's easy for us to vote and think we know the problems and the realities of our districts, but this data allows us to speak to the other 90%.
Exactly.
And I think that's why,
and educate ourselves too. We're not the big total know-it-alls of everything. It's we've looked through some of this data and found some interesting things ourselves in just kind of combing through it.
Yeah, let's go ahead and start with District 2. So District 2, we had 92,160 people. 33 is the median age. And then we have, from a race and ethnicity standpoint, 23% white, not Hispanic or Latino, 8% black, not Hispanic or Latino. Hispanic is 64%. So of the districts, this still holds brand, the most majority Hispanic population, even though we added the District 11, which will be the second one, but 64%. The education attainment, I'm going to kind of do this in the sense of understand in District 2, you have roughly 30% of people with no diploma. So
just high school.
Yeah. No, not even a degree. Not even a high school degree. That's what's interesting about the 6. So it says.
Oh, okay. Adding up the less than 9th grade and 9th to 12th grade.
I'm adding that up as one. And then the 30% do have a high school diploma. Right. And then you have the other
15% with some college but no degree, 5.6% associate's degree, 12.4% bachelor's degree,
Yep.
and 3.9 with a graduate degree.
And what I love about this, I mean, this is the other big part, is the 4.9.8% is speak Spanish. So Spanish is the predominant language at home in this district, which we were even talking about how often you were getting requests to do things in Spanish. And yeah, I mean, there's multiple districts. If anything we see is that, man, Spanish is the lead language in the home. And that to me makes me feel there's a lot we all got to do on inclusion of that culture, that language in the everyday life of running and communicating in a city.
Yeah, I think for many, many years, it was always like, if you would like things provided in Spanish, please let us know. And there definitely has been some shift to always providing both in English and Spanish.
Yeah.
Communications coming out of local government. But there's still some times when that needs to be reminded.
Yep. The next part I wanted to kind of go into of this, I thought that was great, is the mobility section. I thought some of this stuff was interesting. Everyone obviously driving alone is their commuter type, and everyone's over like 70% or higher. I mean, some even in the 80s. But travel time to work, I think I'm going to break this off in segments, under 30 minutes and over 30 minutes. So over 30 minutes, you have 16, you have 20% there. You're looking at 37 to 39%, based off looking at it. Spend 30 minutes or more driving. So then the other 60% is under 30 minutes. But it also...
And I'd have to go back and look at the map, because some of these districts spread pretty far out into the far reaches of the city, and or not just the core that you might think of. District 2 has a big chunk of the north side, but it goes pretty far north as well. So if we're talking about how far people have to drive from the further reaches, and where are they going to work as well, I just like that we're keeping track of this kind of thing, because I think that people don't necessarily consider all these things. So this is a resource that people could look at when trying to decide, where do I want to live in comparison to where do I work, and what that cost is going to be. So in talking about the mobility of various districts, not just District 2, but Americans spend too much time in their cars, and the solution is simple, was an article that I was sent from Slate magazine that basically talked about mobility and where people live and how far away they are from activity centers, and how that having close proximity to activity centers could lessen the amount of time that people spend in their cars. And Dallas-Fort Worth was mentioned specifically, basically saying that Dallas-Fort Worth, the country's fourth largest metro, about 1 in 4 residents live within 3 miles of 5 different activity centers, the Brookings research term for those busy spots. And another 1 in 4 residents have just 4 activity centers within 7 miles. But each year, a household in the second group drives 15,000 more miles than the households in the first group. Moving from one part of a suburb to another could save a typical driver $1,000 a year, hundreds of hours of driving, and thousands of pounds of CO2 emissions. So I just thought that was pretty interesting.
That's incredible.
I think that their solution is to have more activity centers close to residential. So not separating people out so much and making you get in a car for every single trip.
And what do we define as activity centers? Like, is that like, does it have to, can that just be anything that has maybe grocery store?
So the research term that they chose is activity centers as busy spots. And I would have to go back to the actual Brookings study to see what that definition is. I'm sure it's defined.
Yeah.
In my neighborhood, there are definitely multiple activity centers. One of them has a grocery store, a hardware store, hair salon, workout facility. The Cowtown Marathon is moving into some space over there. And so that's all walking distance from several neighborhoods around it. And then another has, TCU is right there. So there's quite a bit of, I think there's like 2 or 3 grocery stores that are within walking distance.
I love it.
But again, rooftops, income levels all dictate where that kind of commercial activity will go and be successful.
The further areas, we'll see what the data continues to look like on this. We just went through District 2's mobility data, but we'll see how that changes as we look at where people are living in the city. Let's go ahead and move into District 3, which honestly, tell me what you think about this one. So District 3 is the oldest median age group of the districts at 37. District 2 was 33. So 58% of District 3 is white, non-Hispanic, or Latino, 14% Black, 21% Hispanic. So like big aha there, right? I mean, we were just at District 2, which was 64% Hispanic. So that's just a different type of neighborhood, right, of district. So I think that's interesting. Educational attainment. We talked about educational attainment, a third of District 2 not having a high school degree. Here you're at 10%. So, 10% of residents in District 3 do not have a high school diploma. High bachelor's degree, 28%, and a high graduate degree. I'm not sure. I will continue to look, but we're looking at 17.6% of District 3 has a graduate level degree. Seems pretty high. Just getting started here. District 2, the main language spoken at home at 49% was Spanish. Here it's showing 80.9% speaks English.
Yeah, and we didn't look up the walk scores for all of these either. The mobility is addressing commuter times and travel times to work, which are mainly, and it talks about how most people drive alone in their cars. Mm-hmm. And this is high in this district as well. I think that's, based on what's available. Mm-hmm. But there's walk scores that can be looked up as well. And some of those are higher in some neighborhoods than others, depending on if those activity centers are close by.
Yeah, I think the big thing that I'm seeing here difference is also from the mobility is District 3 is part of the urban core mainly as a district. So the whole travel time is a lot less compared to District 2.
Yeah, I think there is some going a little bit west. I'd have to look back at the map that goes outside of the loop, but it definitely, it does go outside the loop. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But a big core of it is inside the loop.
Cool. Let's go ahead and go to District 4. District 4, 92,000 people, medium age 35. And then we have 57% white non-Hispanic, 11% Black, 17.5% Hispanic. What I think is interesting here is the Asian population was at 10, almost 11%, rounding up. So far, that was what stood out when I was looking at this data. Well,
one thing that stood out to me is that this district is entirely outside the loop. And that is something that just happened in this last redistricting, because the previous redistricting 10 years ago, there was an attempt to make sure that every district had at least a sliver that came inside the loop, which I think ended up with people having small parts of the district in the loop, and then the majority of attention would go to where the majority of the population was. And so maybe there were portions of the district that didn't get as much attention as others. So that to be balanced with, if you don't have any constituents that are in the core, do you continue to consider the whole of the city, or do your concerns mainly stay with where your constituents are physically located?
Yeah.
The hope would be that every council member would understand the importance of the whole of the city, and that you don't need a physical presence in that core of the city to understand that things that happen in the core are important to your constituents, even if they are not in there physically. But that mobility and connectivity is important, because if you live completely out of the core of the city, you might never come into the city, and you might not see the value of the rest of the city.
Yeah, I'm going to scroll down right now and look at the mobility times and see what it looks like, what the chart says. The 17%, 30 to 34 minutes. Plus,
it seems like a great deal of them are shorter commute times, but it may be that there's work centers in that area, so they're not having to go. They don't have to go to the core of the city for their work. They may be working in Alliance or something else that's closer by.
Yeah, and I also notice much like overall more educated. They didn't have the graduate degree percentage like District 3 did, but only 5%, 5.3% do not have a high school degree. So, you know, we were at District 3, which was 10%, and District 2, 30%, you know.
Yeah, and the income to poverty ratio is, there's very little poverty in this district as well.
So District 4, interesting, just kind of, you know, this was the, you know, I guess when I think of like this was Carrie Moon's district, and like now, like to see it not have the loop access, I'm interested to see how this brand grows. As also, I know their city council members also relatively a fresh face, a younger guy, a business owner. We'll see what kind of stewardship he has with his district.
And what brand develops.
Yeah, what brand develops. But the Asian thing I thought was, you know, I dissected into that a little bit last pod, but to me that we'll see if I'm going to be watching as we continue to go through these reports. Is that the highest Asian population out of the districts? District 5, also median age 35, 95,729 people live there. Going to the race, ethnicity totals. This is important here, as this is the most predominantly black demographic district with 38.6%, 24.7% white, and then 26% Hispanic. The Asian population here is 7%. And then we're looking at education attainment, less than ninth grade and less than a high school diploma is a total of 8 plus 5. We're looking at 14% when you take when you round up with the decimal. So 14% non-high school diploma.
Almost 25% have a high school diploma, and just over 25% have some college but no degree. 7.5 associates, and bachelor's is 19.2.
Yeah. Still relatively educated. You know, still really educated. Language spoken at home, 67% English. We have, looking at mobility at the bottom here. Let's see what we have.
And I'm not able to go back and forth between, but one thing, renter versus owner occupied is something else that people have concerns about. And this one has a slightly higher rental occupancy than owner occupied.
Oh, good read there. Yep, 55% to 45%. Let me go back for us and see what that looks like. Okay, so District 4, the one we were just talking about, 63% owner occupied, 37% rent. And then if we look at District 3, it's majority rent. Interesting. Owner versus renter. District 3 is majority rent with 57% to 43%. I wouldn't have guessed that, especially with just like the matching with the graduate degrees and all that. That was the one with 17% graduate degree or higher. And then when I look at the District 2, we have 58% own to 42% rent. So District 3 and District 5, which to me have very different demographics, are majority renter than owned districts.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. Thanks for grabbing that one, because I'm gonna start reading those out as we get further down the list. Mobility times look very low for District 5.
Yeah, again, I think there's some large employment centers in District 5. American Airlines is in District 5, some others. So it may be that people are just not having to travel as far for work.
Yep. All right, let's go ahead and go to District 6. District 6 changed a lot, adding Como. Some of my friends who were District 6 are now in District 9, and they didn't know. So
there is that one address on the city's website that you can put your address in and find all of this information.
But to me, what I appreciated of this district, when I think of this being the old Georges Youngest district, I would have always thought this was a district that was just going to be predominantly white and actually, it's both Black and Hispanics are larger. This is a majority minority district with.
It's pretty balanced,
Yeah,
actually, in looking
right?
at the race and ethnicity. 29.7 white, 32.2 Black, 28.7 Hispanic. So I think it may be the most balanced of all the districts. At least it is of the ones we've looked at so
100%.
far.
Yeah, no, 100%. Education attainment under a high school graduation is 11%, 11, almost 11.5%. Everyone relatively high school diploma is at 28.8%, associate's degree at 7%, bachelor's degree at 18.5%, and graduate degree at 12.8%. And that all this data around education attainment is for measuring people over 25 and older. Language spoken at home, 72%.
English.
And then this is it's pretty 53% owner district to 47% renter. Of the travel times, to me, what I'm seeing, this is probably the lowest. I mean, I'm just thinking about just looking at the 30 to 34 minutes. Last District 5 was 20% of that group did 30 minutes to 34 minutes. This is at 16%, which could have been the lowest I've seen.
Yeah, and speaking of that Slate article that talked about activity centers, I think there are a lot of activity centers in District 6, but they are
true.
Some of them are aging, and I know that they're looking at some of those revitalizing and bringing back kind of some mixed use in those activity centers. So there's potential and possibility of making those better and having there be the ability to access some of those resources more closely and using other forms other than driving alone.
Yeah.
Is a possibility.
Yeah, and also I think a number I want to start catching us at as we're a little past halfway is the 200% over the poverty line number. This is 68% for District 6. I'm going to just see how much that moves moving forward, just to see if what that does. Because some things look like it moves and others don't. This that has so much data. Occupation. Again, you should just nerd out and read this for your district at minimum.
I think listening to us rattle off these numbers is probably a little challenging if you're not pulling it up and looking at the charts and graphs, because there's pie charts and bar graphs and all the things there that make it much easier. So I would encourage everyone to pull it up and look at it while you're listening to us yammer on.
Yeah, and try to have your synopsis. You know, we're trying to wrap up each one like, what we've noticed. So for District 6, I think what Ann said is this looks like the most balanced district. Like that's, what
as
I would
far
get
as race and ethnicity, for sure, yeah.
So District 7, which has the cultural district.
And still has a pretty crazy boundary. That hasn't changed in the redistricting. It's still got little little cities that it goes around and little things that take it out and loop in stuff that isn't contiguous.
Yep. Median age 35, 91,821 people live there. 57.5% white, 8.7% black. 25.2% Hispanic, 4.7% Asian, 7 a little bit over 7% do not have a high school degree, and then we have large bachelor's degree here. This one might be, I have to go back and look, but bachelor's degree at 25%. One of every 4 person in District 7 have a bachelor's degree. That seems pretty high. And then you had 13% with a graduate degree. 80% English spoken at home.
70% owner occupied.
Wow. Yep. 70%.
Almost 71.
Yep. And this is interesting. So this is why I started wanting to read this stat. 200% and over the poverty line. We just said like 60, mid 60s for the last district. This is 81%. 200% over the poverty line. Mobility wise, there are some people who drive. I mean, to me, this is some of the largest hour or more groups of people.
Yeah.
You had
the 45-minute to an hour and over an hour.
Yeah. I mean, 8% said 45 to an hour, 7% an hour to an hour and a half, and then 2% over an hour and a half.
Yeah, it is that far west side. And I think that there's been a lot of conversation about the time it takes if you're coming into the city from the west. And then connectivity to transit, I think, is not huge in District 7. So through the cultural district and in the core, it definitely is. The frequency of transit on the West 7th Camp Bowie corridor is the highest frequency of transit in the city, with a option every 7.5 minutes. But I don't think that that's carried out throughout the entire district.
As I look back, like I'm going back towards the 200% over the poverty, the 81% looked high, but the highest so far is District 4 at 85%. So that was pretty large.
So District 8 is 91,300 population with a median age of 32, which I think is on the lower end. Is that the lowest?
It is the youngest district. Yes.
Youngest district. The race and ethnicity, it is 43.8% Hispanic and 33.9% Black, non-Hispanic, or Latino, with 15% white. Educational attainment, 33% has high school degree. My math is
24. It looks like a little bit over 25% when you add the decimals.
right.
So one of every four. So this was the under a high school degree, the second highest behind District 2. District 2 is still the most with 30%.
Okay.
Which I see when I look at education attainment and we're trying to build prosperity, I think, man, to have that many people without a high school degree creates a lot of challenges to upskilling, to getting on pathways. And so that's the reason why that number's important. And to it just, to me should definitely be like, what kind of availability to just hold jobs, get promoted, own homes. We'll see
in the home ownership, it's 57%. So
that's
owner versus rented,
which is better.
57% home owner occupied. Yeah. And something we haven't touched on at all in this conversation so far has been the home value and the building age of the housing stock. So some of these districts have newer neighborhoods with lots of new housing. Some of these districts have predominantly older, aging housing stock.
And something that I feel like I am noticing as we're navigating this is like this District 8 here. It's like, okay, high levels of no high school diploma, but yet high levels also when it comes to ownership of a home. And I think this is something you see in historical districts like District 8, where that's a historical area with a lot of just history in the home ownership in the communities there. I think the same with District 2.
And I think also it raises up the concerns that people have as improvements come to these districts that maybe have been underserved in the past, that those values will increase and people will struggle to maintain that home ownership. So I think it's something that needs to be very carefully looked at to make sure that people who have over all these years been able to maintain that ownership, for them to be able to continue to do that and not be wary of those improvements coming and not want those improvements to come in order to not have displacement occur. So I think that those questions of displacement need to be addressed very carefully.
Yeah, I've been looking at the 200% over the poverty level. It's at 50%. So I'm looking back at all of the other ones, and I think that is the lowest of the districts.
The income to poverty ratio.
Yeah. Which tells a story as well. But what's also just exciting to me, like the District 2, District 8, it's like, man, there's a lot of home ownership, but at the same time, education attainment is low. So there's just like a lot of history there. They're also the younger districts though. So it's like a lot of older people who's from those districts, either North Side or District 8, South Side, but yet it's young. And it's also, like you said, a melting pot. So I don't know. It's exciting to see. This data just makes me think about a lot of different decisions and how we all work together. What was the mobility on 8? It's some of those least commute, like longest commutes. Probably looking at the data, the lowest so far. Less than 10%. I mean, less than 7% do 35 to 39 minutes. 6% 40 to 44. We were just talking about those being double digits in earlier
in the other
groups.
districts.
So let's go ahead in District 9. This is your district.
Yep.
So some of this might make sense to you already. 86,000 people. Is that the smallest district population
It's
size?
the smallest we've looked at so far.
Okay.
All the districts before redistricting and the adding of districts 10 and 11 were over 100,000.
Yeah.
And so part of the redistricting and adding additional districts
Yep.
was not only for representation, but also because some of the districts were getting pretty large.
Yeah.
So this reduced the amounts. They have to, there's rules in redistricting about the percentage differences in the size of the various districts. So we'll have to see what 10 and 11 are to determine whether 9
Those
is
are going
the
to be
smallest.
those are going to be exciting because those are the newest ones for us, and this is their first data ever.
Yep,
So-
absolutely. So 34 years is the median age. 44% white, 10% black, and 41% Hispanic. It has been considered a Hispanic opportunity district even before this redistricting happened, but I don't think has ever been represented by someone who is Hispanic. Educational attainment seems to be on the high side.
I mean, you still have a good, you're probably this is the middle of the pack of when it comes to under a high school degree, 20%. I only think 5 and 2 was higher. Higher number of under high school degreed. Which again, to me, is just a number that it's important because when we talk about prosperity and upskilling and just that kind of part, that number is how many and who is in need on that level. What's your take on this? I was personally surprised how large Hispanic population was due to all of the taking out of Rosemont and all of that to do District 11. That I was actually surprised that it was still relative. I mean, you're still arguably basically looking at everything. I know District 2 and District 11 is over 60% Hispanic. 8 was 44, like in this range as well. But you're mirroring. I mean, the mirroring of Hispanic communities and white household communities is it's still pretty equal.
Yeah.
Which I thought the whole District 11 creation would maybe
dilute that.
Yeah. So I think that is still meaningful to the representation there in District 9.
Yeah, I think that it's a majority renter.
Yeah.
So 52% renter occupied and 47 owner occupied. It does include all of downtown and the near south side. So I think there's quite a bit of renter occupancy in those areas.
Something I'm noticing as we do this is so far the places with more poverty and lower education attainment actually has higher percent of ownership than, like when I look at District 3 and District 9, both were the majority renter districts, but high education, high wealth, high money. That was
I think,
interesting.
the funny thing is that people have an idea in their mind about what renting means.
Yeah.
And often they use it to disparage and be concerned and worried about the addition of multifamily rental units because they think it's going to be lowering their property values or bringing an element to the community that they need to be worried and concerned about. But I think if you look at these numbers, that's not the case.
Yeah.
I think it's realistically not the case because a lot of people rent and it's not all negative and bad.
Yeah. That to me was like, this shows that. This tells that story.
Absolutely.
Your district is ain't got no time to be driving. Y'all look how different that is. It is drastic.
Yeah, we've got some very big bars up there on the low amounts. And the funny thing is somebody asked me the other day, they were saying that they couldn't get anywhere anymore in less than 30 minutes. And I started thinking to myself, that is not the case for me. But I live in the middle of District 9. And so that's kind of the middle of the city almost. So everything is kind of accessible to me at a less length of time. Yeah. So even to go to the far reaches of the city from the middle of the city is not that bad. But if you live in one of the far reaches and want to get to the other far reach, then that's going to add up to a lot more time. Yeah. Well, that's one of the reasons why it's nice to live in the core of the city.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go ahead and move to District 10, which now we're in the new ones. And I've already done this homework already. I'm just having the privilege to do this now with Ann. So, and also kudos to everyone. If you're still listening to this pod, by the way, and you're still actually going through this, that means you must have had off on Monday, on July 4th. Maybe you work for Mr. Zeta or something. I don't know, because you got off on Monday and you're just hanging out with us. You know,
listening to the minutia,
having
the
a drink,
nerdy stuff that we're into.
Yeah, maybe you have your laptop open and you're just following along. And hey, if you are and you have some DMs you want to send around what you noticed, please do. Let's go ahead and dive in, though.
I mean, we could literally dive into any one of these demographics and go much deeper.
Oh yeah,
so this is
a whole
just
episode,
touching
for
on
each one.
So 90,000 population, 35 median age, 63.8% white, and 19.2% Hispanic and 8% Black. So this is the district in the north. I think there was definitely a lot of growth in the far north of the city. And so while there was some talk of adding 2 districts that would be like minority opportunity districts, with the rapid growth of the far north Fort Worth and enabled to keep balanced districts amongst the 11 districts, pretty much required that there be another district in the far north part of the city. So this one does come a little bit more in, but it's all outside the loop. So that's another second district that's all outside the loop.
And what I'm currently noticing, I just did a quick glance to all the other ones. It is the most white district, and it's not even close. I mean,
with the 63%.
Yeah, with the 63.
And owner occupied 77.8%. So this, I think if you were to look at an aerial photograph, you would see that there is a lot of single family subdivisions in this district. It's kind of the area where a lot of new single family neighborhoods have been built.
Over the poverty level, 200% is one of the highest as well at 89.8%. So that's pretty, I mean, to give you perspective, when we last really kind of sat with this one district, Nettles district at 8 was at 50%. So, you know, kind of a much jump on the different dynamics there. And what's cool about this stuff, you guys can get all the way down to your zip code and do this same exact exercise. So you'll be able to see that in the descriptions. Time to work. So here's a great example of how much driving happens for them. There are more people who drive 45 minutes or more than District 9 does 30 minutes or more.
Yeah, and I think that part of that has to do with the road network. You know, in the core of the city, there is a robust grid network of roads. They may not be wide roads that carry a lot of traffic quickly, but there are multiple ways to get places. And I think in District 10 and other areas of far north Fort Worth, there's not that grid pattern of streets because it was kind of a more rural area that got annexed into the city and still has farm to market roads that have not been, it's not that they need to be widened and added in a bunch of lanes, but there's just not a grid of network that allows you other ways to get around. And so at peak times, you're going to be sitting in traffic longer than you would if you were in an area that gave you other options.
Here we're looking at 55 to 57% of people who live there drive 30 or more minutes to work.
Yeah.
So
these are things to take into consideration when choosing where to live. Although, you know, if they call it drive to qualify, and if homes are less expensive, then people consider that's what they can afford, and so then they do that, but they don't necessarily calculate into the equation the value of their time, the value or the cost of car ownership and insurance and all of those things. So if you were to calculate all those things, you might make another choice, which is why it's cool to have all this data available.
Yeah. District 11, I'm District 11, and I think it definitely tells a different story than 10, but 10 has 97,000. I mean, 11 has 97,000 people, and then 33 median age.
Young?
Yep, it was young, one of the younger ones.
63.1% Hispanic, so this was definitely the Hispanic Opportunity District that was desired and was created.
Yeah, to me, what's also attractive about, I mean, like that's surprising is, I mean, 15% white households, you know, in District 11. I mean, that I'd be interested to go back to see which one's the lower than that. That, I mean, that's that to me is a small number for the majority population of Fort Worth. Like, I think that that district, that just seems very interesting. There, 18% Black, only 2.4% Asian. I thought it would be a little higher, but it looked like that's just all the Asian population went to District 4. Just because 11 and 4 hit Haltom City-ish kind of area. So kind of go around it. This is something I noticed, though. We do have District 11, the largest non-high school degreed population of the districts, with 21% having less than ninth grade. Think about it. 1 of every 5 person in District 11 has less than a ninth grade education. And then another 16%, 9th through 12th. So you're looking at 37.5% of the population there doesn't have a high school degree. And we talked about Texas A&M, and we talked about kind of like who's going to be able to, like, how do we make sure who's benefiting from this education pathways, all these companies moving in, who gets to. This is the one where it was also surprising, 52% Spanish speaking in the household.
Right.
So it wasn't just the majority, it also was the dominant. Like, it's clearly bigger than everyone else's combined.
Yeah.
And that to me is a huge opportunity to think about, like when I think about our home associations, when I think about how our schools communicate, how our politicians communicate. I know they made this a big deal when it came with Rick Herring and Jeanette and Spanish speaking and who can speak Spanish. I remember this being a big ordeal, but now I see why it's such a big ordeal by the numbers. I feel bad that District 11 is more made for me, a non-speaking Spanish-speaking person, when the majority of the houses around me are more comfortable in Spanish.
Yeah, I mean, I think the comment you made before is when you look at this data and you see how you fit into it and how the majority of your neighbors fit into it, it informs how you're going to act and navigate your neighborhoods and your community when you are aware of who your neighbors are.
Yeah, I mean, and going back to your point that you talked about renting and owning, yeah, this is still a high owner occupied, 57% owner.
Yep.
You know, so we talk about, oh, wow, there's renting is bad, but if you look at the educational attainment, the wealth of each of these districts, some of the places that look like they would have not a lot of ownership, it's actually majority ownership districts. So that whole conversation, I mean, I need to process even what that means or thinks when I think about that moving forward. But that is a great thing to identify there.
And it looks like a lot of short commutes too, the travel time to work. Mm-hmm. If you add all those up, under 25 minutes, add up to a big chunk.
And what I've also noticed in District 11 is the lowest number of percentage of people in the district over 200% poverty line, which it was at 46.9%. This is the lowest. So when 1 of every 5 person in District 11 doesn't have a 9th grade or higher education, when 52% speak Spanish, it is just, there's so much going on here that when we really made a Hispanic opportunity district, but it's almost like we made a Hispanic economy that we need to support, understand, and help them navigate freedom in this district. Like it's a lot of it.
Well, and a part of the conversations that were had during the election too, were this was kind of a district made up of neighborhoods,
yeah,
and not as many institutions and establishments such as that. So I think that the topic that came up in that Slate article about activity centers, I think there's a potential for that in this district because allowing activity centers that have those resources close by is a positive for those neighborhoods. And I think a lot of times people fight against the adding of things that are not just homes exactly the same as what you live in. Yeah. And that being able to see the value brought to a neighborhood by having a combination of things, I think is something important, not just for District 11, I think for all of our districts.
Yeah, 100%. Well, there we go. We just went through every district's, and again, each one could have been its own episode. But if you made it this far, kudos to you. You are a rock star. And we just felt like getting into the meat potatoes and making an episode for the savants of 817 podcast listeners. This was for you guys.
Although it just may make all of our people just drop right off and be like, oh, we're not going to listen to them anymore. How boring is all of that?
Yeah, but they're savants. There's a good 12 people probably right now, just like, man, this is exactly what, we needed to know, all these little nuances. And again, we will have all this data so you could follow along and participate. I'll probably even go back and make something in the beginning telling people
Get prepared.
This is when you need your computer. So, cool. Well, let's go ahead and move into wins and losses.
So my loss is there's been several articles, and we'll put those in the show notes as well, about the closing of the downtown library. And I only chalk this up as a loss because I feel like there is not a solid plan that is at least being communicated to folks about what are the future plans for a central library. I truly believe that as a city approaching 1 million people, we need to have a robust library in this core of the city. And I absolutely see the value in redeveloping an entire block that was a problematic basement location with leaking problems and a fake facade around the outside. As glorious as it looks and as beautiful as it looks in those photographs, all of that is like a fake facade. It's not a historic building. It was built in the 90s. So I am not saying that it's a loss that we are allowing that property to be redeveloped into something more fitting for a downtown environment. But I absolutely think it could be a loss if we do not have a solid plan for a library in our urban core. Libraries serve a vital purpose. They're not the same as they have been in years past. They are evolving, but they definitely need to be physical locations. Even if many of our resources are now online and that whole computer element is there, there definitely needs to be a place where people can gather. And libraries are one of the last free public resources available to community members, from people experiencing homeless to young children to people looking for a job to elderly. I mean, libraries are there for everyone. So while I keep assuring people that there is a plan to continue to have a library in the urban core of the city, I struggle to find that communication coming from a reliable resource that I can continue to assure people that that's the case. So unless we continue to make sure that we say that and insist upon it, it could be a big loss if what we end up with is not a robust library facility in the urban core of the city.
That was powerful. It makes a lot of sense. And I just think about how, we were just going through all the districts and all the districts like satellite libraries that we get to participate in, but just the network of it and how many people go downtown and, how downtown is also a part of this data and what that says. So
right. Downtown is a neighborhood too.
Yeah. My loss is MedStar needs millions to cover shortfalls this year. Fort Worth leaders will consider giving it to them. MedStar and the city of Fort Worth are looking for new ways to make the long-running EMS service financially viable, but until they find a solution, the city might have to fill in funding gaps. The EMS authorities asked the Fort Worth City Council for $1.5 million per quarter for the next fiscal year. To me, why this is a loss is, again, MedStar is connected to 911. 911 is connected to police. Police is connected to a lot of our city budget. And so this just seems like, one, how can we not fund something that's about emergencies in our neighborhood? And then two, I guess it's like, people always talk about the problem with some things that are not private sector, because private sector performs better than the public sector. We hear a lot of that with schools not having, I guess, competition. But this is an example where a private strategy on something that should I don't know. I don't know how other districts do, or other cities and metros do this, but getting a MedStar and an ambulance and an emergency call when you make that call, if anyone else had to make that call, it seems like something that shouldn't be up to the ranks of can they make profit off of it and how do they make profit off this process. There's also just a big loss because it's not just police who get a lot of money in their city. And to me, this is an attachment to them. But also, we spend a lot of money on healthcare and our expensive healthcare system because we also don't believe in universal healthcare or providing affordable healthcare. So it's not like these hospitals aren't making any money either. So it's a loss because we're talking about a situation where two industries get tons of money and are somehow can't afford MedStar. That just seems mind-boggling to me.
Yeah, it's something I think they definitely need to work out. I saw several quotes in the article from council members who were saying, we definitely need to make sure this is funded so that it works.
Yeah.
But we need to explore how, like you mentioned, other cities might be handling it in order to make sure that we are sustainable in how it works.
All righty, your win?
Well, my win is that recently there have been several articles talking about the Barry Theater on Hemp Hill and how it has been, it's owned by the Mercy Clinic, which is a clinic that provides healthcare to folks that live in 76110, which it has done for years. And it recently added 76104 to it, but it's people who do not have insurance. And so they provide a vital role in the community and have been doing that for a number of years. But they own the Barry Theater, which is something that has been in the Hemp Hill Barry Urban Village for many years and was identified as kind of an iconic structure in that area, a historic structure, but it doesn't have any historic protection. Mm-hmm. And so I think recently they've submitted some paperwork to the city about possibly demolishing that building in order to build their new and expanded clinic to provide all the resources that they are having a hard time doing in the small building that they're in now. They've been planning to expand their services for quite some time. And they own the vacant properties next to the Barry Theater, but I think actually they were given the Barry Theater is what one of the articles said. So at first people were very upset because there are people who have a lot of memories about things that have happened in that theater over the years. Many, many, many years ago, there was the last users of it were providing Spanish-speaking films, and people walked from the various neighborhoods around there. So what my win is that the Mercy Clinic folks have sat down with stakeholders in the community, and they are having a conversation about how do they continue to provide the important resources that they do in their clinic to the community, but also they come with a willingness to look at the consideration of restoring that theater and making it something that could also be beneficial to the community. So I think it's a win when people come to the table willing to talk and have these conversations, and hopefully that will continue to be a win.
Yeah, the communication and all that changed really fast. Once from Austin at Urban Fort Worth dropped that Twitter report, like he's kind of was the first to break it. And then
he tracks all that stuff. So he's constantly seeing what's been submitted for demo and what's, being submitted to be built, and tracks all those things.
And so I remember once that was tweeted, it was like a complete freak out from everybody. And then now it seems like it just went to the right direction and everything's okay.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if there's still work to be done. And restoring a historic building is definitely a challenge. But I think that there are people who have information and resources that can be helpful to that. And so, what I think could be another win out of all this is being a little more intentional about some of these assets in our community that need this attention, and maybe getting out ahead of that and making people aware of what resources are available to repurpose them and adaptively reuse them so that we can have more wins that like this will hopefully be.
Yeah, no, well said. My win is it's a multifaceted. I think in another story, I could have talked about this for a while too, but the win here is that Fort Worth made the Wall Street Journal. And for me, as someone who is a news junkie and subscribed to a lot of different news, including the Wall Street Journal, to see Fort Worth in the in the front of the Wall Street Journal, a international publication that people use to make decisions as leaders of businesses and economies. So I just really was excited to see that happening. But what was cool about it, it was also a positive story about Fort Worth and how our commercial real estate market is booming, even though the markets around us are not. It's the fastest growing Texas city, lures more than $2 billion in new projects. Now, I'm going to pause on that win. Another win I'm going to give is to the Economic Development Department of our city of Fort Worth. I think they do great work. I think for as little as we give them in the sense of funds, they find a way to be scrappy and do that. And so we're really lucky to have that space. Now, the loss part of this article for me was it says that we had a 16% vacancy, which is super low. Oh, 13%. Sorry, roughly 13%. Dallas was 30%. Last week I said 27% was my guess, that Fort Worth vacancy. I guess to me the loss on this is that I think that number is flawed, or like we need another source. I'm not saying JLL is, I mean, they are a real estate business. You know, if the data is coming from a real estate business, how objective is it? I'm interested to know the leases. I am knowing how rough and outdated our downtown office space is. So I just, that number is concerning to me because that seems very low, and bragging about that number, we better make sure that it's right if we're trying to beat our chest and to all these other markets and being like, oh, you guys are at 30. Oh, New York, you're at 50 and we're at 13%. I want to know what the leases are. I just want to make sure that that is right, because that seems, you know, me and you could walk into downtown right now and I'm not betting that 87%.
Quite that full.
That it feels that full. So, yeah, that's my take on this article, and it will be in the description.
So I guess that wraps us up for today. I hope that our focus on the data and the demographics of our city was not too boring to folks, and that they dive into the data and look at the statistics of the things that are meaningful to them. And those short stories, I think, were helpful and beneficial, and we look forward to visiting with you all next week. But that's it for today.
Have a happy July 4th. Be safe out there.
Dopamine swipe, follow us, likes, double tap. Now they control your life, control your life. Dopamine swipe, follow us, like, double tap. Now they control your life.